Professor, it's great to see you. Thanks for being with us. Was the seizure of this tanker legal?
On its face, it sure looks like it. We had a warrant issued by a U.S. federal court. We had sanctions in place, actually a pretty comprehensive regime against both this particular tanker and as well as numerous sanctions against the Venezuelan government and nation going back to 2005. But against this tanker, there were sanctions against it going back to 2022, in fact, for allegedly illegally smuggling oil back and forth from Iran and Venezuela. And as we heard the press secretary say just earlier, that there are forfeiture procedures. I mean, that's pretty standard. And in fact, the United States has seized oil before pursuant to sanctions, and then had sold the oil and had the money distributed to actually victims of terrorism regarding Iranian oil. So I expect to see something similar here.
Really interesting. Now that we understand a half dozen more tankers have been sanctioned, Professor, should we expect a half dozen more seizures?
Well, it does seem convenient that this one, that even though it's been sanctioned since 2022, this tanker was seized right off of Venezuela, of course, within the greater context of over 15,000 U.S. Armed Forces personnel now stationed and deployed outside of Venezuela, including the United States' largest aircraft carrier. So the pressure is being ratcheted up, as we also heard from earlier, the boat strike campaign, in which over 22 boats and almost 90 individuals have actually been killed, seemingly outside of any kind of due process, unlike the due process that was employed for this tanker. And the precision boarding and interdiction and seizure of that tanker. Hats off to the amazing United States Coast Guard and the full teamwork there of the United States Armed Forces showed that it can interdict and detain individuals anytime it wants to. So I hope it starts to do that against these low-level drug smugglers as well. So it'll be interesting to see, because at some point, if you seize enough tankers, and that's the primary monetary flow into the Maduro regime, at some point, are we going to engage in a blockade of Venezuela? Because that ratchets it up to war. I mean, a blockade is an act of war. So it's going to be interesting to see if this is going to be piecemeal, or if this is, signs of more to come and more to come soon.
Really interesting. So, we heard coming into our conversation here from Caroline Levitt, who said that we're going to be keeping the oil. President Trump was asked about this by reporters yesterday. He was just coming up with that answer on the spot. Listen to what he said.
We're interested in the seizure of this tanker. Well, what happens to the oil on this ship?
Well, we keep it, I guess.
Where does it go? What port does it go to?
Well, you have to follow the tanker. You're a good newsman. Just follow the tanker.
Do you know where it's going?
Follow it. Get a helicopter and follow the tanker.
Is it true it's going to?
But we're going to, I assume we're going to keep the oil.
He said, I guess we're going to keep it. And then later, I assume we're going to keep the oil. Was there a plan going into this?
I'm sure there was, but those kind of details usually don't rise to the level of the president. He trusts his folks to execute the law, hopefully here properly, and it sounds like they will. The United States has confiscated items that were ill-gotten gains, so to speak, illegal oil. And again, we have, and it goes through court. The government's going to have to prove that oil was being illegally smuggled, essentially in violation of U.S. federal law, and the court will issue its order and usually just goes back to the U.S. Treasury. Again, depending on which particular sanctions regime that they're going to cite for this particular seizure, depending on what's in that warrant. It'll be interesting to see where the money goes. For example, earlier Iranian oil has been seized and has been awarded to victims of terrorism. For victims of terrorism that were, state-sponsored terrorism by Iran. So either way, it's going to go into the U.S. federal coffers.
I want to ask you, Professor, about the string of strikes that we have seen against alleged drug boats. I think you referred to them already, and the legality around these actions. It's something that I asked retired General Wesley Clark about yesterday on Balance of Power. Here's what he said.
Apparently, these people were involved in shipping drugs. That's not the major source of drug shipments into the United States, of course. And some of it may not have been coming to the United States. In this case, apparently it was going to Suriname and then maybe to Europe. But the fact is, the rules of international law, maritime traditional practices, seamen stranded at sea get picked up. They don't get killed. It's a combination of a plan and then opportunism. But the idea clearly is to put the pressure on Maduro and get him out of town and out of the hemisphere.
What's your reaction to what the general said, Professor? And as a former JAG officer, are you surprised that there hasn't been more demand or there hasn't been more evidence presented? I guess there's a lot of demand right now. We just haven't seen it, that these are in fact drug boats.
Well, I mean, I think the American people are, pretty busy and distracted, and they're just seeing these strikes, but they're not seeing the after effects and actually the individuals being killed, right? I mean, I have two things regarding what General Clark just said. First of all, the entire campaign of claiming that this is an armed conflict against drug cartels is unlawful. Yeah. It goes against what the United States traditionally views as law enforcement interdiction missions by the United States Coast Guard, and it goes against international law. These groups are not engaged in any kind of violence, protracted, intense violence against the United States, such as Al-Qaeda was, right? So Al-Qaeda was an armed group we were in an armed conflict with. So the entire construct is unlawful and it's wrong. And it's asking and it's ordering our service members to engage in illegality, pure and simple. And it's not very effective, because what you need to do is interdict and then detain, and then you interrogate, you interview these low-level alleged drug smugglers so you can go all the way to the top. So this is not even the most effective and smart way to go about this. And second of all, the second boat strike, from all the reporting, sure sounds like those folks were shipwrecked. It doesn't matter if they were Al-Qaeda, for example. Once they are, if we're going to say this was a war, once they are out of war, they're shipwrecked. They are protected individuals unless they're actually engaged in hostilities. They had no weapons. They had no radio. They were desperately trying to clamber on top of their boat. They should have been protected. Right. And if this had been a war, that would have been a war crime. And since it's not a war, it's actually just murder.
It's a case of murder. So if you were handed this case to defend as a JAG officer, would you take it? Could you defend it?
Of course, I would take it. Everyone, I mean, due process requires, and our Constitution requires, the zealous defense. And I would have to see what kind of situation these individuals were in, what kind of orders they were given, what facts they were actually operating off of. But I do believe Admiral Bradley has explaining to do, and Secretary Hegseth, first and foremost, has explaining to do to the American people. Why is he ordering our service members to just kill summarily outside of armed conflict? That's not what the United States military does. And the United States military doesn't kill individuals that are considered protected persons, that are out of any kind of fight. Not that this drug running was actually a fight. So of course I would defend them. I was a defense counsel at the trial level and at the appellate level. And I would like to see the legal memo that was written by the Department of Justice that supposedly rationalizes this entire campaign. I think that.
Do you think we'll ever see the video? Will we see the video of the second strike? At one point, President Trump said, "Well, will we?" is the question, because it's up to Pete Hegseth now, and well, we haven't seen it yet, Professor.
Well, it will be interesting to see what kind of pressure the Senate Armed Services Committee brings, because the Republican leader of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Wicker, has continued to say he wants hearings, he wants an investigation, he wants to get to the bottom of this. So there's some bipartisan pressure right now on Secretary Hegseth. And by the way, there's a U.S. federal law which is about to be signed regarding the annual spending bill for the Pentagon, actually cuts Secretary Hegseth's travel budget by 25% if he doesn't release the exords, executing the orders for this operation of boat strikes, and if he doesn't release the video.